The stars looked different from the bridge of the Dominion's edge as Commander Kelthur studied the blue planet ahead. His crystalline skin caught the light from the ship's controls as he watched Earth grow larger on the main screen. The Zephyrian. Empire had sent him here with 5 warships to judge if these humans were worth conquering or if they should just be. Destroyed Kelithar had done this before on 12 other worlds. Most species either surrendered quickly or fought briefly before. Following the Zephyrian technology. The reports about humans said they were primitive and divided, but the long-range scans showed something interesting. These creatures had spread across their entire planet and even reached. Their moon with crewed rocket sub-commander Vexstar approached with a tactical report. The humans had detected their arrival and were moving ships to intercept. Small vessels. Mostly, but they came forward anyway, despite being completely outmatched. Kelthur found this curious. Most species tried to hide when the Empire arrived on Earth. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon watching the alien ships through the viewport. They were beautiful in a terrible way with smooth curves and strange lights that pulsed like heartbeats. His hand shook slightly as he gave orders to his crew. Humanity had dreamed of this moment for centuries, but not like this. Not with warships appearing without warning. Lisa Grant sat in the pilot seat of her fighter craft trying to keep her breathing steady. She was part of the first contact team along with 5 other pilots. Their job was to approach carefully and attempt communication. The alien ships were 10 times larger than anything humans had ever built, and their weapons were. Completely unknown Dr. Helen Carter worked frantically in the communications center trying to send peaceful signals on every frequency she could think of. Mathematical sequences, prime numbers, music, pictures of Earth's children. Anything that might show the aliens that humans wanted to talk, not fight. But the alien ships remained silent and continued moving toward. Earth Kelthur watched the small human ships approach and felt something strange. These beings knew they were going to die, but they came anyway. The lead ship was transmitting signals that his translators couldn't decode, but the pattern suggested attempts at communication. He ordered his ships to hold position and wait. Lisa Grant's fighter was the closest to the alien fleet when her targeting system suddenly activated on its own. A software glitch that had never happened before made her weapons lock onto the nearest alien scout ship. She frantically tried to disengage, but her finger slipped on the emergency override, and her missiles launched. The 2 small rockets streaked across space and struck the Zephyrian scout ship before anyone could react. The explosion was tiny compared to the alien vessel, but it killed 3 crew members instantly. On the Dominion's edge, alarms began screaming, and Vexstar demanded immediate retaliation. Kelith stared at the tactical display in shock. The human attack had been clumsy and poorly aimed. If they had wanted to start a war, they would have targeted his command ship, not a small scout. But Empire protocol was clear. Any attack on Zephyrian forces required immediate and overwhelming response. The human fighters scattered as plasma bolts began firing from the alien ships. Lisa Grant screamed into her radio that it was an accident as her squadron tried to escape. 2 human ships exploded in bright flashes before they could retreat. Jake Morrison watched his people die and ordered all ships to fall back to. Earth's defensive parameter Kelthar felt sick as he watched the human ships flee. The beings inside. Those destroyed vessels had been alive moments before. They probably had families waiting for them to return home. But Vexstar was already preparing the next wave of attacks and demanding permission to pursue the retreating humans. The battle lasted only minutes, but changed everything. When the human ships reached Earth's orbital defense platforms, they turned and prepared to make their final stand. Kelthur could see on his sensors that there were thousands of humans on those stations. Workers, families, children who had nowhere else to run something made him call for a ceasefire. Vexstar questioned the order, but Kelthur's authority was absolute in combat situations. He told his fleet to maintain distance and observe while he studied the tactical recordings of the encounter. What he saw made his blood run cold. The human weapon activation had been clearly accidental. Their pilot had been trying to stop the launch sequence when it triggered. The missile strike was random chance, not planned aggression. These humans had tried to communicate peacefully, and when violence erupted by accident, they had immediately retreated to defensive positions instead. Oppressing an Keothar had spent his life conquering worlds for the Empire. He had seen species beg for mercy and others fight to the last breath. But he had never seen anything like what these humans had done. They came forward to meet strangers despite being outgunned. When disaster struck, they protected their homeworld instead of seeking revenge as both fleets withdrew to regroup. Keothar found himself questioning everything he believed about conquest and empire. The humans had shown courage in approaching his ships and wisdom in retreating when violence began. They had not responded to his attack with hatred, but with desperate protection of their people for the first time in his military career. Commander Keothar wondered if the Empire might be wrong about a species. These humans deserved a chance to explain themselves before his people destroyed their civilization. But he knew that Vextar would report any hesitation as weakness, and Fleet Admiral Morgan would not tolerate delays in conquest. Blue Planet continued turning into darkness, as two very different civilizations prepared for a war that nobody wanted but seemed impossible to prevent. 3 weeks passed since the first contact disaster, and Keothar found himself stationed on Mars, while his fleet prepared for the full invasion of Earth. The red planet's surface stretched endlessly around the temporary Zephyrian base as he stood watching Earth through the observation dome. The blue world seemed so peaceful from this distance, but his instruments showed massive military preparations happening on its surface. ESUB Commander Vextar entered the command center with reports of human communications they had intercepted. The translation systems were finally beginning to decode their language, and what Keothar heard surprised him. Instead of war songs or battle cries, the humans were broadcasting messages of hope and calls for peaceful contact. Dr. Helen Carter had been working without sleep for days in her laboratory, trying to create a universal translator. Her team had analyzed every signal from the alien ships, looking for patterns that might allow communication. She refused to believe that war was inevitable and kept sending mathematical proofs and star charts, hoping the aliens might respond. Lieutenant Sam Brooks checked his weapon systems one more time before heading home to see his daughter. The 8-year-old girl was sick with a rare disease that human medicine couldn't cure. He spent his days preparing Earth's defenses, knowing he might die before seeing her grow up. His wife had died 2 years earlier, and his daughter was all. The family he had left. Keothar began monitoring these human broadcasts more carefully than his duties required. He learned about their cultures, their families, their dreams of exploring the galaxy in peace. The more he discovered about these beings, the less they seemed like enemies, and the more they reminded him of his own people before the Empire consumed everything. They were engineer Tom Bradley worked in underground factories, building new weapons for the coming war. His hands moved quickly as he assembled targeting systems and missile guidance computers. But at night he went home to his garden, where he grew flowers for his elderly mother. She had been a teacher before the aliens arrived and still believed. That understanding could triumph over fear. Vextar grew suspicious of his commander's interest in human culture. Empire doctrine was clear that studying enemy societies was only useful for finding weaknesses to exploit. But Keothar seemed genuinely curious about human art and philosophy. When Vextar suggested bombing population centers to break human morale, Keothar refused and ordered continued surveillance. Instead, the breakthrough came when human forces captured a damaged Zephyrian probe that had crashed during a reconnaissance mission. Dr. Alex Martinez led the team studying the alien technology and made an incredible discovery. The probe systems were connected to something like a neural network that allowed instant communication across vast distances. Lisa Grant struggled with guilt over the incident that started the war. She had been promoted to squadron commander, but spent her nights staring at pictures of the aliens who died because of her accident. Captain Jake Morrison tried to convince her that it wasn't her fault, but she couldn't forget the moment when her finger slipped and changed everything. Keothar received regular reports about the captured probe, but wasn't concerned until his technical staff mentioned strange energy readings. The probe's empathic resonance system was still partially active and broadcasting random emotional patterns. Any Zephyrian who came too close would feel whatever the probe was receiving. Martinez worked carefully to understand the alien technology without damaging it. His team discovered that the probe was somehow connected to the emotions of nearby beings. When they felt happy, the probe's lights grew brighter. When they felt sad, the colors shifted to darker tones. It was like the machine could read their hearts. The accident happened when Kelthur was inspecting the probe monitoring station. A damaged circuit suddenly reconnected, and the empathic link activated at full power. For the first time in his life, Kelthur felt the emotions of an alien species flowing directly into his mind. The experience was overwhelming and terrifying. Through the broken probe, he felt Dr. Martinez's excitement at making scientific discoveries. He experienced Tom Bradley's love for his mother and his fear of the coming war. Most powerfully, he felt Sam Brooks's desperate love for his sick daughter and his willingness to die protecting her future. These emotions hit Kelthur like physical blows. Zephyrian Empire had removed most emotional capacity from their people centuries ago, believing it made them better warriors. Kelthur had never experienced the pure, unconditional love that Sam Brooks felt for his child. He had never known the joy that Dr. Martinez found in learning new things or the simple happiness Tom Bradley felt when his flowers bloomed. Vexstar found his commander collapsed on the floor of the monitoring station with tears streaming down his crystalline face. Kelthur claimed equipment malfunction had caused temporary neural feedback, but his second-in-command wasn't convinced. No technical failure could explain why a Zephyrian warrior would weep. Fleet Admiral Morgan arrived from the home system, with the main invasion force expecting to find Earth's defenses mapped and ready for conquest. Instead, he discovered that his advanced commander had spent 3 weeks studying human culture and had made no preparations for attack. When Kelthur suggested attempting diplomatic contact, Morgan's rage was immediate. The meeting between the two officers was brief and decisive. Morgan accused Kelthur of being contaminated by alien influence and stripped him of command. Vexstar would lead the invasion while Kelthur faced court-martial for tactical weakness. The execution would happen after Earth's conquest was complete, but something had changed in Kelthur's mind during his brief connection to human emotions. He had felt what it meant to love someone more than yourself. He had experienced the drive to protect the innocent and the hope for a better future. These feelings were foreign to Zephyrian culture, but they felt more real than anything he had known before. As Morgan's fleet began moving toward Earth for the final assault, Kelthur made a decision that would have been impossible before his empathic experience. If the Empire was determined to destroy these remarkable beings, then perhaps the Empire was wrong. Perhaps there were things more important than conquest and more valuable than victory. Human defenders watched new alien ships appear in their sensors and prepare for the end of their world. They had no way of knowing that one Zephyrian commander was questioning everything he had been taught about strength and weakness, about enemies and friends, about what it truly meant to be alive. Fleet Admiral Morgan wasted no time demonstrating Zephyrian power to the humans. His massive dreadnoughts moved into Earth's orbit and began systematically destroying major cities with precise plasma bombardments. The attacks weren't meant to conquer, but to terrorize the population into immediate surrender. Kelthur watched from his cell aboard the command ship as New York disappeared in a pillar of fire. Millions of people died in seconds, while Morgan calmly marked targets on his tactical display. The Admiral explained that humans needed to understand their place in the cosmic order before negotiations could begin on Earth. The surviving governments frantically tried to organize evacuation efforts as more cities burned. Captain Jake Morrison coordinated refugee ships, while Dr. Helen Carter pleaded over every communication channel for the aliens to stop the slaughter. Her messages went unanswered. As the bombardment continued, Vexter approached Morgan with a request to execute Kelthur immediately. The former commander's emotional contamination might spread to other crew members if left untreated. But the Admiral wanted Kelther to watch Earth's destruction as a lesson in the cost of defying Empire doctrine. The execution was scheduled for the next day, but Kelther had no intention of dying in chains while innocents burned below. His crystalline physiology gave him advantages his captors had forgotten during their centuries of peace. The force field holding him was designed for normal prisoners, not someone who could manipulate electromagnetic frequencies. Through bioresonance-emittering Sergeant Rick Taylor led a squad through the ruins of Denver, searching for survivors when something crashed near their position. The burning wreckage was clearly alien technology, but the being inside was still alive. Rick's first instinct was to finish off the enemy pilot, but something about the alien's injuries made him hesitate. Medic Emma Johnson had seen enough death during the bombardment to last several lifetimes. When Rick called her over to examine the crashed alien, she almost refused. But her oath as a medical professional was stronger than her hatred for the beings destroying her world. The alien was badly hurt and would die without immediate treatment. Kelther expected to be killed when the humans found him, but instead felt gentle hands treating his wounds. Through his damaged translator, he heard the human medic arguing with her sergeant about giving aid to an enemy. She won the argument by pointing out that a living prisoner might provide intelligence about stopping the attacks. Dr. Helen Carter arrived at the crash site within hours after Rick Taylor reported capturing an alien survivor. She had been hoping for this chance since the war began and brought every piece of translation equipment her team had developed. If communication was possible, this might be humanity's last opportunity. Conversation was difficult, at first with broken phrases and confused meanings, but gradually Kelther began sharing what he knew about the invasion plans. Denver would be hit again in 6 hours, followed by strikes on Chicago and Los Angeles. The humans had barely enough time to begin evacuations if they moved immediately. Captain Jake Morrison faced the hardest decision of his military career when Dr. Carter brought him Kelther's intelligence. Trusting an alien who might be feeding them false information could lead to disaster. But the alternative was watching more cities burn while they did nothing to stop it. Colonel Frank Stevens commanded the military district and wanted to torture the alien prisoner until he revealed everything about Zephyrian technology. Stevens had lost his family in the New York attack and saw no reason to show mercy to any member of the species that killed them. His hatred was shared by many survivors. The debate raged for precious minutes while Morgan's fleet continued its bombardment schedule. Finally, Jake Morrison made the choice that would define humanity's future relationship with other species. They would trust the alien and act on his information while keeping him under heavy guard. Kelther's intelligence proved accurate when evacuation efforts in Denver began just hours before the next plasma strike. Millions of people escaped the city before the bombardment turned it into molten glass. The same pattern repeated in Chicago and Los Angeles as human authorities followed the aliens' warnings. Vexstar discovered his former commander's escape when the execution detail found an empty cell and disabled force field. Security recordings showed Kelther manipulating the containment system through bioresonance before stealing a fighter craft. The betrayal was complete when intercepted communications revealed he was actively helping human evacuations more in the sea. Fury at his former officer's treachery led to increasingly brutal attacks on civilian targets. The Admiral reasoned that Kelther's emotional contamination made him predictably weak, and he would eventually reveal himself trying to save innocent humans. The strategy was coldly logical and completely accurate. The trap was set when Zephyrian forces surrounded a hospital complex in Miami where thousands of refugees had gathered. Morgan broadcast a simple message that the facility would be destroyed in 1 hour unless the traitor surrendered himself. Medical personnel began frantic evacuations, but couldn't possibly move everyone in time. Kelther heard the ultimatum while hiding in the ruins of Atlanta and knew he couldn't let innocent people die because of his choices. Emma Johnson and Rick Taylor tried to stop him from revealing his location, but he pushed past their arguments. These humans had shown him kindness when they could have chosen vengeance. The confrontation happened in the hospital courtyard with thousands of refugees watching from the windows above. Kelther walked slowly toward the Zephyrian landing craft, while human soldiers formed a protective circle around the medical facility. His surrender would save the hospital, but guarantee his own death. Vexstar emerged from the transport, expecting to arrest his former commander and complete the mission that should have ended weeks earlier. But Kelther had one final surprise prepared from his study of human tactics and determination. Sometimes the greatest victory came from sacrificing everything for others. Explosion destroyed 3 Zephyrian fighters and damaged 2 more as Kelther detonated the stolen craft he had rigged with plasma charges. The blast created enough chaos for human forces to evacuate the remaining refugees while Zephyrian troops regrouped. Morgan's trap had failed completely. Rick Taylor found Kelther badly injured in the wreckage, but still alive. The alien had timed his desperate gambit to maximize damage to enemy forces, while keeping himself far enough away to survive. Emma Johnson worked frantically to stabilize his condition as evacuation ships lifted off around them from his command. Ship Morgan watched the rescue operation with cold satisfaction. His former officer had revealed the full extent of his emotional contamination by sacrificing military advantage to save enemy civilians. The lesson would be valuable for other commanders who might be tempted by alien influences, but something unexpected was happening among the Zephyrian crew as they watched a human medic treating their former commander's injuries. Several junior officers questioned why beings they were supposed to conquer would risk their lives saving someone who had betrayed his own people. The question spread quietly through the fleet. Kelther had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed when he chose to save human lives at the cost of his own safety. The decision marked him as a traitor to his species, but also proved that understanding between different forms of life was possible. His choice would echo through both civilizations in ways he couldn't imagine. Vexstar took command of the invasion with a brutality that made even veteran Zephyrian officers uncomfortable. His strategy was simple and cruel. Target every civilian population where the traitor might appear and force Kelther to reveal himself. Through predictable emotional responses, refugee camps, hospitals, and schools became primary military objectives. The attacks intensified as Vexstar studied patterns in human evacuation routes and defensive positions. He quickly learned that Kelther's contamination by human emotion made his former commander's actions easy to predict. The alien would always choose to protect the weak rather than strike at military targets. Gilthar recovered from his injuries in an underground medical facility where Emma Johnson and Dr. Alex Martinez worked to understand his unique physiology. His crystalline structure could heal remarkably quickly, but required specific mineral supplements that were rare on Earth. The humans shared their limited supplies without question. Captain Jake Morrison faced impossible choices as Zephyrian attacks grew more savage and precise. His remaining forces could barely protect major population centers while Vexstar systematically hunted civilians in smaller communities. Every military decision meant abandoning some group of innocents to their fate. Engineer Tom Bradley worked around the clock modifying human weapons with technology salvaged from Kelther's crashed fighter. The alien power systems were incredibly advanced, but required completely different manufacturing techniques. Tom's engineering team learned more about energy manipulation in 3 weeks than humanity had discovered in centuries. Lisa Grant led the most dangerous missions, flying reconnaissance around Zephyrian positions to gather intelligence for evacuation efforts. Her fighter squadron had been reduced to 6 pilots, but they continued challenging enemy forces 10 times their size. The memory of her accidental first shot drove her to take increasingly desperate risks. Dr. Helen Carter spent every moment with Kelther learning about Zephyrian culture and technology while teaching him about human philosophy and art. Their conversations revealed that his people had once been very different before the Empire stripped away their capacity for individual emotion and creative thought. The breakthrough came when Tom Bradley successfully integrated Zephyrian power cells with human targeting systems. The hybrid weapons were still inferior to pure alien technology, but gave human forces their first real chance of damaging enemy ships. More importantly, the collaboration proved that the two species could work together. Kelter felt strange emotions, watching humans risk their lives to defend people they had never met. The concept of self-sacrifice for strangers was foreign to Zephyrian military doctrine, but seemed natural to these remarkable beings. Their actions made him question everything he had believed about strength and survival. Lieutenant Sam Brooks brought his daughter to meet the alien who had helped save millions of human lives. The 8-year-old girl was still sick, but her father wanted her to understand that not all aliens were enemies. She gave Kelter a drawing she had made showing humans and Zephyrians working together among the stars. The gift affected Kelter more powerfully than any weapon could have. Through his empathic abilities, he felt the pure hope and innocence in the child's artwork. She saw a future where different species could be friends instead of conquerors and conquered. The vision was beautiful and heartbreaking. Rick Taylor initially distrusted the alien despite witnessing his sacrifice at the Miami hospital. But working alongside Kelter during rescue operations gradually changed the Marine sergeant's perspective. The alien fought harder to protect human civilians than some human soldiers did and never asked for anything in return. Emma Johnson became Kelter's closest friend among the humans as she continued treating his injuries while learning about Zephyrian medicine. Her compassionate nature helped him understand concepts like forgiveness and redemption that had no equivalent in Empire culture. She showed him that healing could be more important than conquest. Vextar's campaign of terror reached its climax when his forces surrounded the underground shelter, where most of Earth's remaining leadership had gathered. The facility housed not only military commanders, but also thousands of civilian refugees, including many children. Surrender demands were broadcast on all frequencies. Human response surprised Vextar when instead of surrendering, they requested a meeting to discuss terms. Captain Jake Morrison led the delegation while secretly preparing a desperate counterattack using the hybrid weapons Tom Bradley had developed. They had one chance to break the siege. Kelter insisted on joining the rescue mission despite his injuries and the certain death that awaited him if captured by his former people. His knowledge of Zephyrian tactics and technology made him invaluable, but Emma Johnson begged him to stay hidden where he was safe from Vextar's vengeance. The conversation revealed how much both sides had changed during the months of conflict. Kelter spoke about concepts like mercy and hope that he had learned from humans, while the human survivors had developed tactical ruthlessness they never thought they possessed. War had transformed everyone. Our Alex Martinez made a final attempt at diplomatic solution by broadcasting mathematical proofs and scientific discoveries that humans and Zephyrians could share if they worked together instead of fighting. His message included detailed star charts showing resource-rich systems that could support both species without conflict. Morin responded to the peace overture by ordering immediate execution of all prisoners and total destruction of the shelter facility. His contempt for human weakness and disgust at Kelter's betrayal had reached a point where only complete genocide would satisfy his sense of justice. Battle for the underground shelter lasted 18 hours as human forces fought, with desperation born of having nothing left to lose. Lisa Grant's squadron provided air support while Tom Bradley's hybrid weapons finally proved their worth against Zephyrian shields. But victory came at a terrible cost. Kelter's presence in the battle marked him permanently as an enemy of his own species. When he used his intimate knowledge of Zephyrian weak points to guide human attacks, he crossed the final line between loyalty and treason. There could be no redemption or forgiveness from the Empire after such betrayal. Sam Brooks was wounded during the fighting, and his daughter's condition worsened from the stress and poor conditions in the shelter. Kelter used his medical knowledge to help treat both father and child, but knew that human medicine alone couldn't cure her rare disease. The solution would require Zephyrian biotechnology. Victory at the shelter proved that humans could defeat Zephyrian forces when they had advanced warning and proper weapons. But Morgan's fleet still controlled Earth's orbit and possessed enough firepower to destroy the entire planet if he chose total annihilation over conquest. As news of the successful defense spread among surviving human populations, Kelter realized that his choice had consequences beyond his own fate. His betrayal of the Empire had given these remarkable beings hope and weapons to continue their resistance. But it had also marked them for complete destruction. The final message from Fleet Admiral Morgan was broadcast to every human settlement and resistance cell on the planet. In 72 hours, the entire Zephyrian fleet would converge on Earth's position and reduce it to molten rock. No surrender would be accepted, and no mercy would be shown to the species that had corrupted one of their own. 72 hours to live gave humanity just enough time to understand how completely they were doomed. Morgan's combined fleet included 300 warships with enough firepower to crack planets. No amount of courage or clever tactics could overcome such overwhelming force. The human survivors gathered in their deepest shelters to await. Extinction Caliph stood in the command center watching tactical displays that showed his former people preparing for Earth's final destruction. Every ship in the Zephyrian Empire had been recalled for this demonstration of what happened to species that corrupted their warriors. His betrayal will be answered with Genocide Captain Jake Morrison called together the remaining military leaders and civilian authorities for one last strategy meeting. The discussion was brief because everyone understood their situation perfectly. They could die fighting or die hiding, but they were definitely going to die. The only choice was how to spend their final hours. Dr. Helen Carter refused to accept defeat and worked frantically on a desperate plan involving the empathic resonance technology they had studied from captured Zephyrian equipment. If they could somehow overload the network that connected all enemy ships, they might disable the fleet long enough to attempt evacuation. Tom Bradley supported the plan by calculating power requirements and system vulnerabilities, but the numbers were brutally clear. Any attempt to overload the Zephyrian network would require someone to physically access their main command ship and manually trigger the feedback pulse. It would be suicide. The discussion grew heated as different groups argued about whether to attempt the impossible mission or accept their fate with dignity. Colonel Frank Stevens wanted to launch every remaining fighter in one final attack, while Rick Taylor advocated for evacuating as many children as possible before the bombardment. Big Thar listened to the debate knowing that he alone possessed the knowledge and access codes needed to infiltrate the Zephyrian flagship. His former people would never expect their greatest traitor to voluntarily board their command vessel. The plan could work, but would certainly kill whoever attempted it. Emma Johnson pleaded with Kelther to reconsider when she realized what he was planning. The alien had become more than a patient or even a friend during their time together. His gentle nature and genuine caring for human welfare had proved that understanding between species was possible. She couldn't bear to lose him. Dr. Alex Martinez spent hours with Kelther discussing philosophy and the meaning of individual choice versus group loyalty. The alien struggled with concepts of personal identity that had been suppressed by centuries of empire conditioning. Who was he if not a Zephyrian warrior? And what did he owe to beings who were not his own kind? The answer came from an unexpected source when Sam Brooks brought his daughter to say goodbye before the final battle. The little girl had grown weaker during the weeks of war, but still smiled when she saw Kelther. She asked him to promise that humans and aliens would be friends someday, even if she wasn't alive to see it. That simple request from a dying child crystallized everything Kelther had learned about human nature during his time among them. These beings fought not for conquest or glory, but for the possibility that future generations might live in peace. They valued hope more than victory and love more than survival. Lisa Grant volunteered to pilot the infiltration mission when she learned about the plan. Her accidental shot had started this war, and she felt responsible for every death that followed. Flying Kelther to the Zephyrian flagship would let her make amends while giving humanity its only chance for survival. The preparation took 18 hours as Tom Bradley modified a captured Zephyrian shuttle to avoid detection by fleet sensors. The craft would only pass inspection for a few minutes before its human modifications were discovered, but that should be enough time to reach the command ship's docking bay. Kelther said goodbye to each human who had become important to him during the months of war and friendship. Rick Taylor gave him a photo of Sam Brooks' daughter to carry into the mission. Emma Johnson shared one final medical lesson about treating crystalline physiology. Dr. Martinez discussed the ethics of sacrifice for others. The hardest conversation was with Dr. Helen Carter, who had made first contact possible through her tireless translation work. She asked Kelther to carry a message to any Zephyrians who might survive the feedback pulse. The message explained that humans had never wanted war and still hoped for peaceful coexistence between their peoples. Captain Jake Morrison provided tactical support for the mission, while knowing he was sending two brave souls to certain death. The modified shuttle could only make a one-way trip, and the empathic overload would kill anyone connected to the Zephyrian network when it activated. There would be no rescue or escape. Tom Bradley worked until the final moment, improving the overload device and teaching Kelther how to trigger it manually. The engineer's hands shook as he explained the activation sequence because he knew he was describing the steps that would kill his friend. But the alternative was extinction for all humanity. The launch happened during Earth's darkest hour as Morgan's fleet moved in the final bombardment positions. Lisa Grant guided the shuttle through the massive alien formation while Kelther prepared for his confrontation with everything he had once been. Neither pilot nor passenger expected to survive the next few hours. Vexstar detected the approaching shuttle on long-range sensors, but dismissed it as refugee craft trying to escape the planet. The vessel's Zephyrian design and proper identification codes allowed it to pass through multiple security perimeters without challenge. No one suspected that their greatest enemy was coming home. The docking bay of the command ship was eerily familiar to Kelther as he walked through corridors he had traveled for decades as a loyal officer. Junior crew members saluted automatically before recognizing his face and reaching for weapons. His presence aboard the flagship meant the end of everything. Lisa Grant stayed with the shuttle as long as possible, providing covering fire, while Kelther fought his way toward the ship's empathic resonance chamber. Her fighter pilot skills served her well in the narrow corridors, but she knew this would be her final battle. At least it would end where the war began, with her weapons firing at alien targets. The empathic chamber was heavily guarded, but Kelter's knowledge of ship layouts and security protocols allowed him to reach his destination. The massive crystalline structure that connected every Zephyrian mind across the galaxy hummed with power as he prepared to destroy it and himself in the process fleet. Admiral Morgan arrived at the chamber just as Kelter activated the overload sequence. The two officers faced each other across the room, where one would die and the other would watch his fleet become powerless. Morgan demanded to know how a warrior could choose alien emotions over the glory of the Empire. Kelter's answer would be his final lesson to the people who had shaped him into a weapon of conquest. He had learned that true strength came from protecting others rather than destroying them. The humans had taught him that love was more powerful than fear and hope, more valuable than victory. The empathic pulse began building toward critical resonance as alarms screamed throughout the ship. The empathic resonance chamber filled with blinding light as the overload reached critical levels. Kelter felt the network connections of 300 ships flowing through his mind like rivers of fire. Every Zephyrian consciousness in the fleet was linked to him in that final moment, and he shared with them everything he had learned from humanity. Fleet Admiral Morgan staggered backward as alien emotions flooded through the network into his carefully controlled mind. For the first time in his life, he experienced the unconditional love Sam Brooks felt for his daughter, the selfless dedication Emma Johnson showed to healing others, and the desperate hope Dr. Helen Carter maintained for peace between species across the fleet. Zephyrian crew members collapsed as human emotions crashed through their neural pathways like tsunamis of forbidden feeling. Warriors who had never known doubt suddenly understood the fear civilians felt during bombardments. Officers who viewed conquest as natural law experienced the grief of parents watching their children die in wars they never chose. Feedback pulse peaked, and every ship in the Zephyrian fleet went dark as their crews lost consciousness from emotional overload. Navigation systems failed, weapons powered down, and life support switched to emergency mode. 300 warships drifted helplessly in space around Earth, while their occupants struggled with feelings they had no words to describe. Keelthar felt his crystalline nervous system burning out from the massive energy discharge, but held the connection long enough to ensure complete network failure. Through the link, he sensed Lisa Grant dying in the docking bay, where she had fought to protect his escape route. Her final thought was satisfaction that the accidental shot starting this war would be balanced by her sacrifice ending it. Captain Jake Morrison watched from Earth's surface as the alien fleet went silent and motionless. Human sensors detected no weapons charging or engines preparing for bombardment. After months of terror and desperate resistance, the survivors could hardly believe their enemy had suddenly become powerless. The impossible had happened. Dr. Helen Carter immediately began broadcasting messages to the disabled ships, offering medical assistance and peaceful negotiation. Her translation systems had been perfected during Kelthur's time among them, and she could communicate directly with any Zephyrians who regained consciousness. The opportunity for real first contact had finally arrived. Tom Bradley led teams to salvage technology from the drifting alien vessels, while Emma Johnson organized medical missions to help crew members suffering from empathic shock. Many Zephyrians were catatonic from experiencing emotions their culture had suppressed for centuries. They needed careful treatment to prevent permanent psychological damage. Vexstar recovered consciousness after 6 hours and found his command ship drifting powerlessly with most systems offline. His first reaction was rage at Kelthur's ultimate betrayal, but something had changed in his mind during the empathic pulse. He had felt the genuine affection humans showed for his former commander and couldn't understand why enemies would mourn their friend's death. The rescue mission to the Zephyrian flagship found Kelthur barely alive in the resonance chamber, surrounded by burned-out crystal matrices. His sacrifice had worked perfectly, but the feedback had damaged his nervous system beyond any hope of recovery. Rick Taylor carried the dying alien to the shuttle, while Emma Johnson tried desperately to stabilize his condition more and survived. The empathic overload, but would never be the same commander who had ordered Earth's destruction. The forced experience of human emotion had shattered his certainty about conquest and empire. When he looked at the blue planet below, he no longer saw a target for bombardment, but a world full of beings capable of remarkable love and sacrifice. The final conversation between Kelthur and his human friends happened in the medical bay of a human ship as his crystalline body slowly shut down. He was surrounded by the people who had taught him about friendship, compassion, and the courage to choose principles over loyalty. His death would be peaceful among those who understood. His journey, Sam Brooks, brought his daughter to say goodbye to the alien who had become her friend. The little girl was still weak from her illness, but managed to give Kelthur one last drawing showing humans and Zephyrians building cities together on distant worlds. He promised her that someday her dream would become reality. Dr. Alex Martinez recorded Kelthur's final words about the importance of individual choice over cultural programming. The alien's message would be broadcast to every disabled Zephyrian ship and eventually to their home worlds. His ideas about freedom and friendship would spread through their empire. Like seeds of revolution, Emma Johnson held Kelthur's hand as his life faded away. She felt his gratitude for showing him that healing could be more important than conquest and love more powerful than fear. His last thought was wonder at how much he had learned from beings his people considered inferior. The funeral combined human and Zephyrian traditions as both species honored the alien who chose friendship over loyalty. Representatives from the disabled fleet attended despite orders from their home government to avoid contact with human contamination. The ceremony marked the beginning of real communication between their civilizations. Lisa Grant was buried beside Kelthur in Earth's first interspecies cemetery. Her accidental shot had started the war, but her sacrifice helped end it by protecting the mission that saved both worlds. The memorial inscription honored her as a pilot who learned that courage meant accepting responsibility for your mistakes. Some Zephyrians like Vexstar eventually returned to their empire, carrying stories about human compassion and the possibility of friendship between species. Others chose to remain near Earth, helping rebuild what the war had destroyed. Their decision to abandon conquest for cooperation scandalized Imperial authorities but inspired younger generations. Dr. Helen Carter became Earth's first ambassador to alien species and spent years establishing formal relations with reformed Zephyrian colonies. Her patient work in translation and diplomacy proved that understanding between different forms of life was not only possible, but essential for galactic peace. The joint colony ship launched exactly 1 year after Kelter's death, carrying both human and Zephyrian families to establish the first truly integrated settlement. The vessel was named New Hope in honor of the emotion that had motivated his sacrifice and continued to guide both species toward a better future. Tom Bradley's daughter grew up learning engineering from both human and Zephyrian teachers. Her hybrid technology designs would eventually revolutionize space travel and allow rapid expansion into the galaxy. She always kept a small crystal from Kelter's ship in her workshop as inspiration for her work. Memorial dedication ceremony featured speakers from both species discussing how one individual's choice had changed the course of history. Kelter had proved that loyalty to principle could be stronger than loyalty to species, and that true heroism sometimes meant standing against your own people for what was right. Sam Brooks's daughter recovered from her illness using hybrid medical techniques developed by human and Zephyrian doctors working together. She became a teacher like her grandfather and spent her life educating children from both species about the war that brought their peoples together. Her classrooms always featured the drawing she had given to her alien friend. The final image showed the colony ship disappearing into hyperspace, carrying thousands of beings who had learned that differences in appearance and culture were less important than shared values of compassion, courage, and hope. Kelter's sacrifice had given birth to a new kind of civilization, based on understanding rather than conquest's legacy, lived on in every friendship between human and Zephyrian, every joint scientific project, and every child who grew up believing that cooperation between species was natural and normal. The alien hero who chose humanity over his people had proven that love could triumph over fear and that the future belonged to those brave enough to reach across the darkness between stars.